Reviewing the literature. By the end of this session, we hope to be able to define what it means to review the literature and explain its importance. We also hope that we can list the differences in a literature review for quantitative and qualitative approaches, identify the 5 steps in conducting a literature review, and pave the way for you to be able to gain the skills to write a literature review. What is a literature review? It is a written summary of the literature. It describes past and current information and research. It is usually organized into topics, and it reports the literature based on themes or individual studies. Most importantly, it documents a need for your proposed study. In other words, it identifies gaps in the literature that you are keen to address in your research project. How does a literature review look like for quantitative studies? These document the importance of the research problem at the beginning of the study. Literature reviews in a quantitative study also support the theory or explanation used in the study. It foreshadows research questions, and usually the literature review in a quantitative study foreshadows and provides an explanation for the results in other studies and in the theoretical prediction at the end of the research project. For qualitative studies, literature reviews in this arena document the importance of the research problem at the beginning of the study. However, it is different from quantitative approaches because it does not foreshadow the research questions. For qualitative literature reviews, these are usually broad in scope, encouraging participants to provide their own views. A literature review in a qualitative study is used to compare and contrast with other research projects, and this is usually located at the end of an individual's study. There are 5 steps in conducting a literature review: identifying key terms, locating literature, critically evaluate and selecting the literature, probably the most important step, organizing the literature, and then writing a review. For this particular session, we're going to take a look at the broad area of multiculturalism and then relate it to pre-service teachers, how they are able to embrace the idea of multiculturalism within an increasingly globalized school system. So these are the 3 things that we're going to be mixing around as we try to define writing literature reviews. First step is identifying key terms. We write a preliminary working title for our project and select 2 or 3 keywords that capture the essence. We pose a short general research question that you would like to answer in the study, and then you go and look at a thesaurus of terms to find words that match your topic. You scan the contents in your library stacks and a table of contents of educational journals. For example, when we take a look at programs in multiculturalism, for example, we look at awareness, cultural responsiveness, teaching skills for pre-service teachers in an increasingly globalized world. Here I have highlighted in red the key terms that will enable me to undertake my literature review. When we look at sources, we usually look at summaries initially. We look at journals, indices, databases, and also we take a look at early stage literature. Sometimes we call these web studies, but we need to be careful to make sure that these web studies are of a good and peer-reviewed quality, because anyone can write anything on the web. I think all of us are familiar with that. Again, programs in multiculturalism, cultural responsiveness for pre-service teachers in an increasingly globalized world is what we're trying to look at as an example, as a working example. What are some databases that we can explore? ERIC, PsycInfo, Sociofile, JSTOR, EBSCO, Social Science Citation Index, Dissertation Abstracts, and PubMed. These are the classic sources, conventional sources for databases that one can consult. We search by using key terms. That's important. We've already talked about it in the previous slide. We also need to identify seminal studies in the field. Seminal meaning studies that have created such a great impact. Seminal means it planted a seed that later on grew to become a very fertile source of ideas. So we identify seminal studies in the field. When we have chosen one particular, for example, article, we explore the bibliography or the reference section. And then we identify opposing and complementing ideas. In doing so, we are able to expand our sources, good sources in writing our literature review. We need to, after we've already gathered these sources, we need to critically evaluate and select the literature. And the question we should ask ourselves is it a good, accurate source? When we take a look at international journals, these are some examples of really highly reputable journals: the Journal of Education Policy, Educational Researcher. If you take a look at regional journals, the Asia Pacific Journal of Education is an example of this. If you take a look at a national journal, the British Journal of Education Studies is a good example. Reviewed source, usually the conference proceedings from the American Educational Research Association are highly rated. And then when you take a look at the research studies, we can look at the International CIVID Project, which is one of the landmark studies in the area of civics education. These are examples of good and accurate sources. Continuing on the idea of evaluating and selecting literature, we ask ourselves this question: is the source worthy of inclusion? And in order for us to answer this question, we take a look at topic relevance. Is the literature on the same topic as your proposed study? Individual and site relevance. Does the literature examine the same individuals and sites you want to study? You may be citing literature from, let's say, Tajikistan, and you need to answer the question whether the context in Tajikistan would be similar to your context, let's say Australia or Singapore or the United States of America. Problem relevance. Does the literature examine the same research problem as you propose in your study? Accessibility relevance. Is the literature available in your library, or can it be downloaded from a website? After you have already critically evaluated and chosen your sources, you then organize your literature. One way of doing this is abstracting studies. Contents of abstracts vary for research study and for what you would refer to as essays. The structure is essentially the same for quantitative and qualitative research studies. You have a research problem, questions and hypotheses, data collection procedures, and results and findings. So you need to abstract the studies that you have identified. So in other words, when you already have, let's say, 20 sources, it cannot be that they're just there. You need to organize them, and one way to do it is to abstract them. So identify the research problem of the first source, its questions, hypotheses, procedures, and findings, and do that for all your 20 sources. For example, if we have programs in multiculturalism, so I have, let's say, obtained 8 sources from that, and then another 10 for cultural responsiveness, and then 2 for pre-service teachers. I make sure that my sources are properly abstracted. This is an example of a sample hierarchical literature map. As you can see, I'm using it from a very American perspective. So there are 2 main things that I'm looking at: study abroad programs and US programs. And in this hierarchical literature map, you will see that the boxes correspond to different sources that I have identified. The topmost box, right in the center, the need for teaching programs to be culturally responsive. That's a theme. Bennett, Eastman, Smith, Grant, and Noel have written about it, and they essentially overlap with study abroad programs and US programs. And if you take a look, the boxes are interrelated to each other. They talk about US programs, they talk about study abroad programs. And then at the end, the ones written in red, the text written in red, these are the gaps that I have identified. There's a need for further study in non-English speaking cultures, for example. That's what the literature map tells me. And so the question that I ask myself is, do short-term study abroad programs in non-English speaking cultures help create cultural responsiveness in pre-service teachers? Remember that what we're looking at is multiculturalism, pre-service teachers in increasingly globalized setting. So when we take a look at those three issues, these three broad topics, when I do a literature map, I realize that this is a gap that I could explore. When we construct the literature map, we identify key terms for the topic and put them on the top of the map, which I've already explained to you, sort studies into topical areas or families of studies, and provide a label for each box, which will become a heading for the review. And then when we construct it, we develop the map on as many levels as possible. We draw a box towards the bottom of the figure that says my proposed study. That was the red text that I highlighted in the earlier slides. And then we draw lines connecting the proposed study with other branches of the literature. Aside from a hierarchical map, you can also do a circular literature map, and this is an example of it. So here, the highlighted text in red is located right at the top. I say that this is the area that needs further study, non-English speaking cultures. The short-term study abroad programs in non-English speaking cultures help create cultural responsiveness in pre-service teachers. Remember, I was looking at multiculturalism, I was looking at pre-service teachers in highly globalized settings. A lot of things have been written about it, but when I did my literature review, I realized that based on the sources that I have collected, the gap seems to be this particular area, non-English speaking cultures, particularly for pre-service teachers. So the circular literature map is another way of representing the way that I have organized my sources as represented in this figure in the slide. Of course, the last step is writing a literature review. So it's important for us to use consistent style manual approach. You could use end of text references, within text references, headings, tables, and figures. These need to be consistent. Here at the School of Education at the University of New England, we use the APA 6th edition. The slide says it's 5th edition, but now we all use the 5th edition. How do you write literature reviews? There are types of reviews. You could do it thematically. You can do it study by study, or you can do it using a critical review. For the graduate level programs, what we actually encourage our students to undertake are the critical reviews. That's where you analyze different studies, you synthesize commonalities and variances, and then you add your critique. And in your critique, that's when you identify the gaps and how you hope that your research will be able to address these gaps. Individual work, something that you may wish to do. Create a modified literature map given the article below. Use either a hierarchical map or a circular literature map. Follow the 3 steps in conducting a literature map. Develop the map on as many levels as possible. Draw a box toward the bottom of the figure that says my proposed study. Draw lines connecting the proposed study with other branches of the literature. So use this particular article 2012 from Assessment in Education, Principles, Policy, and Practice, the impact of high-stakes testing, the Australian story. Personal reflection in relation to the proposed assignment 3 that I'm about to undertake for this unit. What types of literature would I intend to use? And that is the completion of this particular session on reviewing the literature. If you have further questions or clarifications, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me through the email that you see on the screen. Thank you.